She was sent to the wrong ranch, until a child whispered, "Heaven sent you here." Chapter 1. The stagecoach jolted to a halt in a spray of snow and dust, the horse's breath rising like steam in the crisp mountain air. Clara's gloved hands clutched the edge of the worn seat as the driver shouted, "Rawlins Ranch! Last stop before the trail bends west." Her heart leapt. This must be it. Clara had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her mind during the long journey west. She had traded everything, her father's Bible, her mother's quilt, even the little locket she had worn since childhood, for the chance at a new life. In her satchel was the letter, neat and precise, signed by the man who was to be her husband. She had been promised a home, safety, and, if God willed it, love. The coach door opened with a creak, and Clara stepped down, her boots sinking into the fresh snow. She blinked at the sight before her, a wide ranch yard with rail fences stretching toward the pines, smoke curling from the chimney of a sturdy log house, and a barn roof gleaming white under the winter sun. Her breath misted in the air as she whispered, "Thank you, Lord. Please let this be the place where my life begins again." Before she could take another step, a little girl came darting out of the cabin, her braids bouncing, her woolen skirt flaring. She skidded to a halt in the snow, her cheeks flushed pink from the cold and her eyes wide with wonder. "Are you?" The child's voice trembled. "Are you the bride?" Clara smiled despite the nerves knotting her stomach. "Yes, child. I was sent here to marry the rancher." The girl's eyes filled with tears of joy. She rushed forward, grasped Clara's gloved hand in both of hers, and whispered so softly it was almost carried away by the wind, "Heaven sent you here. I prayed and prayed, and now you came." Clara froze, her throat tightening. This was no ordinary welcome. The child's words pierced through her heart, filling her with warmth and fear all at once. Before she could respond, the cabin door creaked again. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his frame filling the doorway. He wore a weathered hat pulled low, a long coat that brushed his boots, and a revolver at his hip. His eyes, when they found her, were sharp and cautious, like a wolf who had learned not to trust strangers. The girl spun toward him. "Papa, she's here. God sent her." The man's jaw clenched. He strode toward them, each step sinking into the snow. His gaze swept over Clara, lingering on her veil, her satchel, and finally her hopeful eyes. "You're in the wrong place," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "I never sent for a bride." Clara's breath caught. She reached into her satchel, fumbling for the letter. "But this is Patterson Ranch, isn't it?" The letter said. "This ain't Patterson land," he cut in, his tone hard as steel. "This is Rawlins Ranch." The truth hit her like a blow. Her cheeks burned, and her fingers shook as she held the letter against her chest. The driver was already snapping the reins, the stagecoach creaking back onto the trail, leaving her in a swirl of snow. Clara turned to watch it vanish, her lifeline disappearing with every clop of the horse's hooves. No, oh God, no. When she looked back, the man was standing rigid, his face a mask carved from stone. But the little girl clung tighter to Clara's skirt, looking up with desperate, pleading eyes. "Papa, please," she whispered. "She's the one. She has to stay." Ethan Rawlins, if Clara guessed the name right, looked down at his daughter, then back at her. His lips pressed into a thin line. "You'll freeze out here if you don't come in," he muttered at last. "But only until the next coach comes through. You don't belong here." The words stung, but Clara swallowed her pride and nodded. "Thank you. I won't be any trouble." Inside the cabin, the fire crackled in the hearth, the scent of pine filling the air. Clara lowered herself into a chair while Ethan ladled stew into bowls. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the child's cheerful chatter as she sat beside Clara. When the girl leaned close again and whispered, "I knew heaven would answer my prayers," Clara's heart trembled. She glanced at Ethan, whose shoulders tensed as though he had heard, but chose not to believe. And in that moment, Clara realized her journey had only just begun. Fate, or perhaps God himself, had delivered her not to the ranch she expected, but to the one where she was truly needed. The following morning, Clara awoke to the sound of chopping wood outside. She rubbed the sleep from her eyes, the memory of yesterday flooding back like a dream she wasn't sure she wanted to wake from. The small cabin was warm, the fire still glowing in the hearth. Beside her, in a little cot near the corner, Annie slept curled beneath a patchwork quilt. Clara smiled softly. The child's hand had found hers sometime in the night, and even in sleep she clung tightly, as if afraid Clara might vanish with the dawn. Clara gently tucked the quilt around her and rose. She smoothed her skirt and peeked through the frosted window. Ethan Rollins stood in the yard, his axe rising and falling in sharp, steady rhythm. His breath plumed in the cold air, his movements precise, purposeful. He looked like a man who had carried his burdens too long, with no room in his life for softness or mistakes. Yet Clara couldn't forget the way his shoulders had tensed when Annie whispered, "Heaven sent you here." By midday, Clara had rolled up her sleeves and busied herself in the kitchen. She found flour, beans, and a bit of salt pork, and soon the aroma of biscuits and stew filled the cabin. Annie sat at the table, her eyes glowing with delight. "Papa never makes biscuits," she whispered with a giggle. Ethan came in a short while later, snow clinging to his coat. He paused at the doorway, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took in the sight of Clara ladling stew. "You didn't have to do that," he said, his voice gruff. Clara met his gaze evenly. "I know. But I wanted to." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Annie clapped her hands. "Papa, sit. She cooks better than you." A ghost of a smile tugged at Ethan's lips, quickly hidden as he took his place at the table. Over the next days, Clara settled into a rhythm on the ranch. She mended torn clothes, braided Annie's hair, and read aloud by lamplight when the evenings grew long. Though Ethan spoke little, his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking. He watched the way she coaxed laughter from Annie, the way her hands brought order and warmth into the house, the way her presence softened the silence that had weighed on the cabin for years. One evening, after Annie had gone to bed, Clara stepped outside to find Ethan leaning against the fence, staring at the horizon. The sunset painted the sky in crimson and gold, the mountains shadowed against the light. "You lost someone," Clara said softly, her breath clouding in the air. Ethan's jaw tightened. "My wife. Annie was barely a year old. Since then, it's just been us." Clara's chest ached at the raw pain in his voice. "She misses her mother." His eyes flicked toward her, hard and guarded. "And you think you can replace her?" Clara straightened, her voice calm but steady. "No. But I can care for her. And for you, if you'll let me." The words hung in the air, daring and true. Ethan turned away, his hands gripping the fence until his knuckles whitened. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in a voice almost too low to hear, he murmured, "You shouldn't have come here." Clara swallowed back the sting. "I didn't. God brought me." 2 days later, the stagecoach returned, its wheels crunching over the frozen ground. The driver tipped his hat. "Ready to move on, ma'am? The Patterson Ranch is just down the valley." Clara's heart twisted. This was her chance to leave, to go where she was expected. She looked at Annie, whose small hands clutched the hem of her skirt, eyes wide with fear. "Don't go," Annie pleaded. "Please. You're my prayer come true." Clara's gaze shifted to Ethan. He stood rigid, his expression unreadable, but his fists clenched tight at his sides. His silence spoke louder than words. Clara drew a deep breath, then shook her head. "No. My place is here. The driver nodded and moved on, leaving a trail of snow and dust behind. When the sound faded, Ethan turned toward her, his eyes stormy. You don't know what you're saying. This life, it's hard. It's lonely. You'll regret it. Clara stepped closer, her voice firm. I've known loneliness all my life. But here, with Annie, with you, I feel like I finally belong. Ethan's breath caught, his walls crumbling in the silence that followed. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he reached for her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from years of work, but the touch was gentle. Annie let out a squeal of joy and wrapped her little arms around both of them. See, Papa. Heaven sent her. I told you. For the first time, Ethan let out a shaky laugh, the sound raw and unfamiliar. His eyes softened as he looked at Clara, and in that moment, the weight of his grief seemed to lift, just enough for hope to seep in. Clara smiled through the tears that glistened in her eyes. She had come to the wrong ranch, but God had guided her steps. Not to the man she was promised to, but to the family who truly needed her. And under the winter sky, with Annie's laughter ringing through the snow and Ethan's hand holding hers, Clara knew she had finally found home.